Welcome back to season 2 of the Katie Wellness Show. I am back with more amazing tools, awesome interviews, and some great discussions to help you optimize your health, body, mind, and spirit. Not only can you use these tools every day, you can also teach them to your children and to your family members so that you can raise emotionally and physically resilient children, so that you can show up more in your life, that you can take back your personal power. Get ready to tap into your intuition. I'm so excited that you're here. You are worthy of health and of joy and of thriving in your motherhood, thriving in your life. Thank you for being here today. We can learn so much by listening to each other's stories, and I'm excited to share this interview with you today. Camilla survived some trauma throughout her life and also eating disorders, and we dive into some of these topics, and it's heavier than I normally do, but I think the messages that she shares in here are really important. So stick around to the end where I'll break down the coping strategies that Camilla developed as a way to survive in a similar way that we all develop coping mechanisms from small experiences or large experiences in our childhood that begin to shape who we are and who we are becoming, and how we have the opportunity to look at those experiences as adults and ask ourselves, is this coping working? Is this strategy that I've been doing for most of my life, is it working, or am I ready for a change? Am I ready to do something different? Well, good morning.
Good
Camilla.
morning.
It's so good to finally see you face to face. I've been doing a little bit of LinkedIn stalking, checking out your website. The link that was sent to me didn't work, so maybe
My
we can. Well,
website?
yeah.
Yeah, that's been an ongoing. I don't know why I can't seem to get that. That's always like I get a new website person who's like helping me do it, and then for some reason, and I don't know if it's just maybe it's haunted. Who knows?
Maybe.
It sounds like the only rational, explanation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time to meet with me today and just share your story. I love having conversations, especially with other women, just to hear your story and how you have made it work in life. Like, if, from what it sounds like in your story, in the little podcast blurb email
Yeah.
saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
have Camilla on." It sounds like you were born in Denmark.
Yeah. I'm
Am I
born and
guessing?
raised there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of me guessing, will you just tell me a little bit
I
about your
will. Yeah.
story?
I was born and raised in Denmark until I was about 15 or 16, and then I got into, I say 15 or 16 because I was right at 15 or 16, and I auditioned for an acting school in London and because I really wanted to leave, and then my parents were like, fine, if you get in you can go, thinking, what is she doing, like what's this, and so I did get in, and so I moved to London at that time by myself, and so that's sort of always been my um, I mean, I think I lived in London when I was 9 to 10 with my parents because my dad had a job there, and we went all in. And I was always like, "That's my language. That's my," because I've always like been a big reader, and when you're 9 and somebody speaks a different language, you just pick it up, And I just love the language, and I love school, and so English schools are notoriously tough, and I wanted to go back to London and go to school, and I wanted to go to an acting school because I wanted to be an actor, and that's not in my family of any kind, um, so um, so I ended up just going to London, and then eventually I came here. So I've lived in a bunch of places that I mean, I've always liked to explore new places, but the problem is every time I go, I sort of want to move there. My friend Gloria always says, like, that's your toxic trait, is that you think every time you visit somewhere, you have to live there. And so it is true. Like, we go skiing in Mammoth, and I'm like looking at, like where I can, buy a rent. So, like, it's always that kind of thing.
Was that for that 15 or 16-year-old version of you, was that difficult for you to live away from your family, or did you feel like you had a pretty good experience with it?
I was weirdly independent, like as much as you can be independent at 15. When I see 15 or 16 years now, I'm like, you are a baby. like you're a child. And I mean that is something like that you really are a child. But I don't, there was always like, in terms of taking care of myself, like in terms of pure surviving, because I think that's what I've sort of been like living on, like pure survival, is that I just wanted to. And it's not like I came from a nice place and like with two, nice parents who were just, I always feel like I'm an adult child of normal parents, like they were just, I was an artistic person, and those people were different, and I just loved theater. I loved books. I loved um film and TV, and like literally anything I could, explore and get something out of. And it is sort of, I think, equivalent to traveling, like, and so I just had to, and I think they were like, oh, thank God at that point, because I was not an easy person to, like, my great rebellion was an eating disorder and, way too much artistic expression and creative expression, so
Uh,
yeah.
so when did that, if you don't mind talking a little bit more about the eating disorder, because I
Of
know that
course. No.
that's kind of, we're going to kind of move into talking about healing trauma and how you use your creative side to do
Yes.
that with your eating disorder. When did that begin?
It began, I feel like I was like 12 or 13 when I sort of got because we were always on, like, that's when you start sort of thinking about your body. And my mom was somebody who, she did care about whether or not she was like 2 pounds more or less or something. But I just don't feel like that's enough. That's like more of a show and tell rather than something that gets deep seated in you. And for some reason, I think, like, I think about it a lot because there are, people who think it's genetic, which I think it can. I mean, but food and women, I don't know how, like, and food and anyone is, it's your sort of first substance because you have to, and so I just started, like, that's when everybody sort of started to diet, which is very scary at 13 or whatever. But we did, and I also danced a lot. So it wasn't, a sort of a natural feedback, like, and I don't think anyone said it to me. I don't think I was ever, I remember myself as very heavy, but I now have gone through pictures and I cannot seem to find a picture that, and everyone's like, yeah, you weren't, and I think it was also like, this is just a theory I have, like hormones set in and everything, and you start to feel heavy if you have any sort of also a brain that tends to operate a lot, like then you and heavy thoughts and everything, and I just felt heavy. And I was never on a diet. I just didn't eat, like, and so everyone's always like, well, if you're so good at dieting and like you can always sort of control it. And the thing is, I can't control it. Like that's sort of a thing. I think as humans, we have this thing of like, I can control my body. And maybe some people to a certain extent can, but like you can't really, and certainly not the female body, And so, but it felt, I think, I don't know if something traumatic, I feel like something traumatic may have happened to me before, when I was living in London with my parents, even though that experience, my time in London was, again, I guess it was some sort of escape because that's what I got to sort of, take the train into, like, we lived just like, not in a suburb, but just like outside of central London. And so I got to just take the train and go to London if I wanted, and so I wasn't rebellious in like alcohol and boys and everything. I was rebellious in just needing to be myself and independent. And I think there was with the eating disorder and everything else like that came later, I think there was this like genuine fear of being close, like, because it gets you like it, I felt so much that I was like, the eating disorder was like, and I've only heard it from, friends of mine who've been like, addicted to heroin and stuff. They're like, we can so relate to anorexia because it's that like, it's a complete timeout, complete and utter timeout. And I felt okay, like my brain wasn't over talking. I could concentrate. And that was one of the hardest things when I eventually had to get into recovery, was like concentration, because it's like my body, everything is working and my brain is like, this is too much, And so I did, my eating, just, I was sort of like, you can go to London if you can not die, and you can get into this school. And I got myself sort of on I got into therapy in Denmark before I left, and I sort of got myself on a very, again, it wasn't like a loose like way of eating. It was very structured, but I could do it, and I would look like a thin person, but like not scary in any way, shape, or form. That was the thing, so I could go, and that seemed to be like that very much seemed to be like a thing that I could, and it was very competitive, and I think I always reach like, I think there is a thing where I like reach a point in my both school and like with acting and creative expression where I get very sort of into it and then I get praised for it, and then I feel too much. Then I feel like I'm too much. I'm taking up too much space, and then just like that, I sort of started dropping a lot of weight again, and I think there's a certain level of sabotage that my sort of person seems to like live on and everything. But I also think, I can remember sort of something happening in London, like the first time around when we lived there, that because I got very sick when we first got there and with the stomach flu or something. And there was a doctor who, like sort of checked me out, but he went like a little further than you do with a kid with a stomach flu. And I remember my mom being in the room and him asking my mom's permission. And my mom was like, no, there was no such thing. And to this day, like I still feel like, how did you make that up? And how did you, and I've talked to other doctors. I'm like, is this necessary? Like, let's a grown up, is this necessary in order to check if somebody has a stomach flu? And they're like, a 9? No, like, no. And, and so, I think that, that might have spurred some eating disorder or something on because, um, before that I was a dancer then, and I didn't think that there was anything wrong with it. Was not something I focused on, and I was probably not like, I wasn't a super thin child at that point, but I don't remember thinking that was an issue, but definitely something happened. And then coming out of London and back to Copenhagen, where Copenhagen and Danish school is very relaxed, and also nobody everybody follows each other. So you couldn't, there are no AP class, there's nothing in Denmark that, so for someone like me and not getting challenged, like was like, I think it was like, I challenged myself, and I think, I did anything I could to challenge myself. And I think to a certain extent, that is a lot of the time how I live. Like, it's not as much anymore, but because I'm like, I live in LA and I've been an actress and a writer here, so it's challenging enough, like, but it's so I always think, I wonder if anorexia came from like that weird experience with a doctor. But what happened then, I was in London and I started losing, like it started going really well after my first year, and then I just started losing weight again. And then I did the second year and they were like, we can't have you here. And it was a school of, my principal like was like, my principal interest was like acting and then English lit and art history and stuff. But there was a lot of just dancers at the school, and even with a school full of dancers, ballet dancers and everything, they were like, you're too thin, you have to go home, And so I was sort of sent home, and I was like, all that, like, I was like, I'll do anything to get back and everything, but I couldn't I just got thinner and thinner, and it's sort of like my life is in very two pieces. Because I do remember now telling this stuff and everything, but the first time around when I was anorexic, when I was 14, I was put into a mental institution in Denmark. And, this is the 80s, and it was like a real mental institution. It's like, it wasn't rehab, like it wasn't like an eating disorder, nice place in Arizona. It was like, barbed wire on the, and it was like grown-ups and everything. And people had every kind of mental illness. Um, I have a lot of like empathy for all kinds of mental illness, because it's like, also because like now we're realizing it's like any kind of physical illness. It's like, the same. It's no different, and it should be treated no different. It's I just don't know if I should have been in that particular place because, they didn't, their thing was like reverse psychology. They were like, don't eat. And I was like, okay, like
You don't
I'm
have to
a,
tell me.
I'm like, if that's what you want me to do, like I can certainly do that, and I came out like there at 50 pounds and, you know, um, just looking like you couldn't tell if I was a really old lady or a really young child. Like you couldn't really tell, but that's when I sort of got myself together. And then I got to London and I think my parents were after that, like sort of terrified, and they sort of, if I could prove that I wanted to do it, like, then I could do it, and also when you're in a family, I think and you're the eating disorder person, a lot of the time you are the symptom for everything that has gone wrong or will go wrong or anything. And I think that, you sort of become a weird black sheep, even if you're not, the wild alcoholic, you become that person where everyone can go, well, because, that person had that illness, I felt blah, 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 and I don't think I'm that different from like I might be different from the rest of my family, but in terms of what we all bring to the table, like I think that anorexia is a symptom of like a lot of things that may go on in a family or, you know, ancestors or God knows what, and at the same time, I also think that sometimes I have to treat it as an addiction because that's sort of what I had to learn when I did get it. And that was later on. I was sent home from the school in London. And then I came home and I was still working with the same therapist. And she's like, there's this guy in town, he's American, he does like healing, blah, blah, blah. And that wasn't something we were, like I didn't know about healing. Nobody knew about healing, And
Mm-hmm.
and so she's like, you should go. He's a really good friend of mine, and blah blah blah. And I went, and he told my mom. I went in the first time with my mom. I was like I was in my teens still, like I wasn't an adult, at any, and she was like, okay, well, and he's like, there's this machine that it was something that like it was probably something like biorhythms or something, and he's like, that's what I'll be doing. I won't even go, like, I don't need to touch her. It's like therapy, biorhythms. That's not what he did when I was alone, and he was an acupuncturist. He covered me in needles and he like did everything you can imagine when I was naked and covered in needles. And also at the time, yeah, I was in my late teens, but I had like a body of a 12-year-old, and I think there was something connected to that because you know, I met a girl in there, like, he's like, I want you to read her diary. She left her diary here. And I'm like, oh, like I had a diary of my own. If somebody read that, I was like, and he's like, no, I need
No.
to, yeah, you crazy. And I read it and it was like, at the time I didn't have any sexual experience or anything like that. And it was the most pornographic thing I had ever read, like I was like, and it's like with any kind of sexual like or porn or anything, if like even though you don't know what it is, you know exactly what it is, and you know that something has gone very, very wrong, and especially like when you watch like a 14-year-old 15-year-old bulimic walk in with a book, and I didn't know what a bulimic was. I was like, and I didn't really know. Yes, I knew eating disorders, like I'd read about it, but like it wasn't like everybody, like it's not like now that everybody knows what it is. It was like very unusual and very strange, and I always call myself the original anorexic in Denmark because nobody had really heard about. Yes, there'd been like girls who'd gone on a little bit of a diet and their moms had freaked out, and they started eating again. And I'm sure there are other girls who died from anorexia because we have since the dawn of time, but anorexia has a very low, like 60% die. It's just that it's called a heart attack, that it's called, and then at one point, like people would send me things. I don't know why because I certainly wasn't famous in Denmark, but like people would hear about me, and then somebody would send me a thesis about anorexia in the Middle Ages, whether they were burned as witches or they were canonized in the church. And a part of me was like, yeah, I guess, I was sort of, that's another thing, is that I'm incredibly open-minded to other people's what they have to say. And I think sometimes maybe I shouldn't, you don't necessarily need to listen to everything. And I think that comes from this guy. I'm telling it very, my story very non-linear, but this guy, when I was sent home from England, and then put into this kind of therapy, was he did, because he was a person in authority, and it's something I thought about only very recently. Like, I think because of a person in authority does something very extreme, he also tortured me in a way that was, I think, always like something when people have like sexual things, they also sort of, it sort of sometimes also becomes like a weird magic trick that they think they're doing, and um so when somebody in authority of you going, I'm a doctor or I'm a acupuncturist, they're in authority of your health and they tell you stuff, I think you start to listen, and so everybody around you sort of becomes an authority, and I've certainly noticed that like later on in life where I would get, and I also am I'm very sensitive, but like when people would say something to me like very dark or very fucked up or anything, I would not disbelieve it. I would sort of think, okay, but I would also think it was funny. That was like a sort of a weird artistic removal from extreme insults, but I would still believe them. I would just be like, I guess that's just a crazy weird thing about me, and
Yeah.
and it could be like really extreme things to tell a person, but I was like, oh wow, okay, I guess. And it's always like a weird, because I am an informed and intelligent person, but with that sort of disconnect that happens when you're, because I certainly didn't listen to everybody before that, but with the disconnect that happens is that I think you just sort of, you're taught, and I was also taught to like honor people when they said something to me, or be polite and say please and thank you, which I did. And so getting angry at another person or being like, that's, you're full of shit, basically, which is something I should have probably said so many times, or thanks for the feedback, but no, um, then I just sort of went along with it. And I don't know, I came, when I eventually had to go back and take exams and everything, and that was done in a blur after being, having this thing happen to me. It was a complete and utter blur. And I did really well at school. I was always good, but I could not take an exam. I couldn't understand what it said on the page. Like I wrote essays and stuff. I have no idea what I wrote. And my teachers, they sort of wanted me to go on and do Oxford and Cambridge, and they were like, you can retake your exams next year. And I was like, I'm not doing that again, and so I went back to Denmark, and I really, I'd always, funnily enough, taught exercise and aerobics and everything as my sort of income in school, and just I always like to work. And so I did that, and I met this American guy, and he was gay, and he was just wonderful, and he sort of was like just lovely. And he's like, if you ever want to come to LA, you should, come, and you can come and stay with me and my, three roommates. And I was like, I'll see you there. And I don't think he necessarily thought I was going to come, but he became a very good friend. And I went, and I also went out with some other people who taught aerobics, and we took, we taught classes out there, and then we took classes and all this stuff. And then, when everyone went home, I stayed. And it was coming to LA. At that point, I'd gotten sort of thin again. But coming to LA, there was something about it where I was like, it was a relief, because I felt like I'm going to completely blend in here. Like no one is going to be like, you're crazy, like,
Hmm.
so I think there was that part of it, was that it was, it was like, and I even got too thin for LA, which I don't even know how that's possible at one point, and that's when people started walking up to me in gyms, because that's where I was, and were like, and they would always tell me about like eating disorder, like groups and stuff, and they're like, you need to go to OA, which is one of the bigger ones, and they're like, they'll make you gain weight, and I'm like, I don't think I'm not gonna go, and eventually I did go, and I was in therapy and everything, but I will say what saved me was other people, women especially, because there weren't a lot of men in the eating disorder groups at the time, which I think has changed a lot. And because men too have eating disorders, and I went in there, and it was something about, because it's very much based on 12 steps, and you are sponsored, and you sort of, um it takes one to know one is sort of the 12 step, and Alcoholics and all that, different, and it's sort of a funny language that you sort of learn. And that whole thing of, the one thing that saved me which also like screwed me up a little bit later. But like the one thing that saved me was act as if. I was like, I don't want to eat and I don't want to this and I don't want, and the whole thing was like, act as if you do was really the thing that I don't know if I ever believed the act as if, but it certainly saved my life, as, I did start to eat and I did start to, and then what happens is that you get, I'd never had like a grown up female body. And that was another whole, like, holy shit, but I did like learn to like to be in a female body. And because I had to learn it, like it wasn't something, and I think with a lot of
I think you're
women,
not alone in that either. I think that for many of us, it takes a while for us to feel comfortable in our bodies because of these messages that we as women get. Even your 12, 13, 14-year-old self was
yeah,
getting messages that, you need to be ashamed of your body, or you need to be smaller, or you need to be X, Y, and Z. And I think even adult women have many of these same messages of we need to look a certain way with
I
our
think so.
bodies. And
Yeah,
so, in order to feel comfortable in our bodies, how do we have to change our bodies? How do we have to um, look a certain way, look bigger in certain areas and smaller in certain areas? And how
yeah.
do we navigate
Oh
being
my God.
comfortable? So, I think you're
Sorry.
not alone in that.
Did you feel the same way when you were in your teens?
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely. I danced in high school as well.
right.
And there's very much of this, like, the smaller you are, the better dancer you are kind of uh,
Yeah,
messaging. No one ever
yeah.
comes out and says it, but the
No,
smaller, skinnier girls are always in the front.
yeah,
And so it's like, how can I be in the front? How can I
yeah,
be better? And so there were times in my teenage year where I would eat very minimal. And about the time I started losing my menstrual cycle, I thought, oh no, this is not right. Like I need to eat more, and that scared me a little bit. But
See, that didn't scare me. I
yeah.
was like, thank God it's gone. Like, I got my period pretty early. I think I was like 11. And I was
Mhm.
like, nope, no, 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 no. And I know all the other girls wanted it. And I was like, yeah, like, I don't at all. And I'm glad that it scared you because it does take a toll on your body not having your period for like 10 years, like it does. It's like I have since then been very concerned about like bones and, like your period really helps your bones and like against osteoporosis, and your period is very useful. Do you know what I mean? And also
Yes.
that's another thing that I got to really just like I was glad when I had my period. I was glad that it explained a lot because like when you get really like I every time I have my period I would be um like why am I so depressed? What's going on? Like I'm taking, and then I would get and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like this is now I know. And every month, I mean, how can I still, but it's one of those things. And I think it
Yes.
is just sort of a thing that makes you feel very human and female in all the right ways, like um I certainly didn't have a problem with it when I got like other than it was inconvenient a lot of times,
Yes.
but like it was certainly like one of those things, but I was very happy when I was because I don't think adult was what I was looking for. I don't know what I was looking for with anorexia, but it I don't even think it was necessarily there is that sort of other human sort of alien thing to people who simply don't want food,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
who can sort of, um, I mean, I was not hungry at all,
Mhm.
and
I
it's,
think in a lot of ways too, we use food as control, that
yes,
maybe so many things in our life feel out of control, but like food is something that like no one else can make you eat. Even if they were to
right,
put food in your mouth, you don't have to swallow.
right,
And so I think for a lot of us, like you said earlier, it was your form of rebellion.
yeah,
No one can make me eat. I'm in charge of this. And
yeah,
I also think you're not alone in that
right.
we use food as more than just, oh, food is fuel. That's what I tell my boys. I have three boys. And
Oh,
I
you
tell them food
do?
is, yeah,
Huh.
food is fuel, right? Like we don't need to be over consuming. Like we can listen to our bodies. We don't
Yeah,
need to be under consuming.
yeah,
Um, but food can also be a substance used in that way
yeah.
to
It
manipulate
can
our
be
bodies.
really enjoyable. It can be unbelievably enjoyable because I weirdly like love good food. Like I love to go to great restaurants, and I love like, I mean, that's another thing we did grow up with before the eating disorder. Really, like we traveled a lot as a family, and we had to try. We couldn't eat off the kids menu. We had to try things, which unfortunately gives you like an expensive palate. Do you know what I mean? Like my parents were like, you can
Yes.
try caviar. And we're like, what? And we're like, oh my God, it tastes really good. And they're like, no, like it was it. So I think that whole thing of it is fuel. It is, and I still get into it. Like I get up really early and I start working and I work. And suddenly like, I'm like, I feel sad. I feel weird. I'm like, no, you're hungry. Like, sometimes I still have that moment of like, oh, why did everything suddenly go wrong today? And I'm like, nothing went wrong. You just need to eat some food, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's literally just, and you can get the enjoyment out of a sort of appropriate normal amount of food, and I do know I mean, obviously there are foods that, because that's also something I didn't grow up with, like fast food and all that stuff, because there wasn't any fast food when I was growing up in the country I grew up in. And I mean, still to this day, I don't know who goes through drive-throughs. I mean, I know there are a couple there, and I remember going to McDonald's in Denmark and sitting down and eating with friends. Like we sat down, we had like not a drink, we had, and so that was another thing that I think I never did, was like eat in the car. Like I've had to learn to do that, because sometimes, as an actor, I was in my car a lot. So I had to be like, okay, you can eat, but when I was sponsoring people because you help people through in eating disorder groups, I literally think I revolutionized like the thing of like, just don't, you can go and buy it if you want. Like mine was always like, if you want to binge, just know what you're doing, like at least enjoy it. Because when you start enjoying it and putting it on a plate, it no longer becomes punishing, and so then it's like not useful, like when
Yes.
if you're doing that with food. And I have always put things on a plate, because I wanted to make sure I ate enough, but there is something in that I do allow myself to really enjoy it, like whatever it may be, whether it's whatever I eat, I'm like, it's going to be enjoyable, because, and that, because for me, that is fuel. Like if it's like you sit down, you enjoy a meal, and then there's a beginning, middle, and an end, and like, and then afterwards you're sort of ready to go again. And that was something to this day, I still have to go. When you have it again, then you can go again. I'm like, oh right, like it's not a natural a thing. My body would be like, I am hungry, and I'm like, what's going on? It's like, you're hungry. It's really nothing more, nothing less. Like,
Yes.
and and it's also one of those things that, like rape and like control of food are very similar in the way that it can control a lot of people at the same time. And I mean, we see like it's a both like withholding food from people and the rape of one person is a great is sort of a great weapon of war, because it shuts sort of everyone up, whether it's like, because you either like people who are not eating are not strong enough to withstand, and also people who like watch like something like, or realize that what's happening is also traumatized, like bystanders are just as like people who can't do anything about what's happening are just as traumatized, and
Yeah,
so
finding their voice and being able to speak up for themselves and ask for help
yes,
or share
yes,
their experience.
yeah,
I
it's a very traumatizing thing to see those two sort of very inhuman things. They are, so I think that that's what's, and there's like around food and, sexual violence and everything, there it's taboo. Like it's like what,
Yeah, we can't
especially with,
talk about these things. We just kind of have
yeah,
to
there's
sweep it under
something
the rug.
incredibly raw and it's like somewhat embarrassing about it. And I'm like, it is interesting how we pick those two things. It's like, it's not furniture. It's not, a roof over our heads. The roof over our heads is like about survival as well. But no, like it's about like,
It's very
um,
personal and
yeah.
dehumanizing almost. And the fact that several experiences you had were with people in authority
Hmm.
abusing that power also is very I think you're not alone in that, but I also
No.
think it's so scary. And how do we know, who we can trust when it comes to health professionals, um and what are the ways that we can start to speak up for ourselves and step
Right.
into our own power.
Yeah.
Camille, we only have about 5 more minutes, and I've
Okay.
loved listening to your story, but I would love to hear any what have been the most helpful tools for you in healing from these traumatic experiences?
Well, I think with the eating disorders, there's definitely talking to other people who had it as well. Like, also, I mean, sometimes you end up having a strange sense of humor about it, which is somewhat necessary. It's a little bit necessary. And then, when you're in recovery and doing like eating and being normal and going out with your friend, I mean, I that's where I got most of my friends to this day. Like we'll go out and like that's when we started doing like normal grown up things of going out and crying over boys, and not that that's super grown up, but it was for me at the time. Like, and doing all that stuff, which crying over boys later on becomes super traumatic, but like, but with assault and sexual, like it's a different thing because I didn't really remember it. Like, yes, I remembered it sort of like, oh, whoops, And when I told my mom later on, she was like, oh, I thought because I told her eventually at some point, and like my parents were paying for the treatment, quote unquote, So she just she just thought I thought you were making it up, and which I'm a person who makes stuff up for a living as a writer, but I'm not a person who makes, like, I couldn't make that up, like. And so I had to sort of deal with that. And I was at a therapist who was like, when she was dealing with my anorexia, was like, that, maybe didn't, you were already sick. That was always the thing. You were already sick, so it couldn't have affected you. And so I was like, I was already sick and it didn't affect me, and it really did. And so later now, like in the last few years, literally just in the last few years, I've been doing trauma work, which is completely different. It's a lot of like somatic. There's a lot of, for me, what really works. And this is, I'm almost, me a few years ago would have been very embarrassed to say this, but like journeying, like if I put on drums and just go, I want to explore this. Like if I would like, I sort of like protect myself in all the way, and, with light and, whatever else. And then I sort of journey to what it is that I'm looking, and I try not to have it be like the worst thing ever, because I don't think you can handle that on your own. But like, I have really learned a lot of stuff also, like with just like relaxing. Like I never like understood when you watch like I would always like watch actors like talk like this, and I don't know if they did it on purpose, but it is like a thing called havening that literally puts you back in your body, because my trauma for me is like blah, 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 like lots of like not voices, but like my brain is very, very
Just
busy.
noise, very
Yeah,
active.
it's
Yeah.
just like a lot, like the chorus, and it's never kind, ever, to myself. It's kind to other people, but it's not necessarily kind to me. And I really believed it. And it's taken me a long time to get out of, you do not deserve, like that sort of, you don't deserve to be here, because anorexia is like, you don't deserve to take up space. When you are sexually assaulted, you literally disappear from yourself. There's a disassociation where people are like, you sound like you're talking about two different personalities. And in a way, you're talking about two things within yourself that are very authentic. Like the sort of outwardly, I'm fine and 5,000 miles an hour is totally authentic. But the inside, which is like, breaking apart, which you don't even understand, which you think is normal. Like you're like, I'm not going to say that because, you know, and so I think like sort of just like having all those things being sort of integrated in yourself, and also finding out where, when you have a thing, when you have a thought that seems to not be what other people have, like it's a very dark thought, I sort of have to go, where does it sit in my body and how old is it? And that has really changed my experience of how I deal with myself, because sometimes there's a 5-year-old at the steering wheel of a very grown up woman, and I can't, and it's not like I sound like a 5-year-old. I want to make this very clear for people who don't do this kind of, it's not like but my emotions are my reactions to things, and I think that's where you find your, I heard weirdly a Catholic a priest once was speaking at an AA meeting, which I went to. Not that I have, I'm not an alcoholic, but it is very nice to go and hear another kind of trauma, so you can hear your own through, and he said, I found God in my garbage. And I was like, that makes like the minute you start going through, whether it's God or your own spirit or what you find, like whatever you believe in, like it's in there, you know, like that guy that guy that sort of finds the right people, which is a big thing when you're a person with trauma and eating disorders. You have a tendency sometimes to pick, and I'm not saying friends I've had or something were that, but I'm saying like you pick somebody who can just say that one thing to you that you've said to you that is not okay, you know.
Yeah.
And so I've like sort of seeping, like I don't do that anymore, you know. Those people don't, you know, come into my life, and I don't always think they were those people. They were just like, there was like a thing that somebody could say to me that they may not have meant as anything. Well, sometimes I think if you hadn't meant it, you wouldn't have said it, but they had their own shit. Everybody has their own shit, you know?
Yeah.
And so I have had to really go, you know, if I've heard it from myself, chances are if it comes out of somebody else's mouth, it's not okay, you know? And so that's sort of what I work on, this like, you know, thinking positively is something you have, like I've had to really work on to have it be natural, you know. And but that is also, that can be really healing to sort of be, you know, to really work on that, like, because it's for you, it's not for anybody else, it's for you. And it's like forgiveness is for giving up, you know. And that was a hard one. Like, but like, you know, I think that talk therapy is really, really good. But I think you can also talk around where you have to get into the body, because it sits in the body. Trauma sits in the body, and it hides, you know, and you can sort of find it and have it have a voice that, you know, like, and I've gone like much further in terms of like people working a lot with ancestry and stuff now, which I find really interesting, of how, you know, I don't always think, yeah, I think that you can be traumatized through your ancestors and everything, but because we see it sometimes on a huge level in society, you know. But I also think that, you know, where you come from does inform the way you deal with things, you know. And Danes are very, when you first meet us, we can come across as cold and standoffish, because there is that sort of chill before you get to sort of a very smiley, funny, very darkly funny people, you know. But I do think a lot of those things are interesting to sort of bring into your recovery, because, you know, you have to recover the whole thing. You can't just recover one area. And that's what I think the eating disorder recovery brought out. It brought out the trauma, which I did not, and much later, you know. And but I hate to say it, I'm really grateful for that. It came up, and the way it came up. And now, you know, weirdly, I'm friends with not, I don't think it's super weird, but somehow we all sort of gravitated towards each other. A lot of the girls who are, you know, of the people we see in, like, who've had sexual trauma from the people we see in the news, and have since, you know, Me Too and everything. And it's just weird how we all sort of we didn't talk about that, but we did find it eventually, you know. And so I do think to me, that's an enormous relief. That's an enormous relief to hear the story from someone else. And I'm not glad it happens.
It sounds like that inner child work that you're doing, using the visualization,
yes,
using
that
the
is what
like
it
getting
is.
in
I
your
guess it's
body.
inner, like, yes, I haven't, you know, I forgot about that we, you know, because I always feel like I don't have an inner child, I'm an inner rock star. I'm like, you don't. Like, but like, I do think that that's exactly what it is. It's like going, and it is really interesting, and you can do it without anyone knowing. You can also calm yourself down with that, you know, like just sort of breathing and going like this. It's called Hamaning, and it just brings you back to now, which often your brain is not at when you're really, really freaked out, you know?
Yeah. So
So
we all need techniques of how to bring ourselves back into our body, instead of in our thinking mind where we're overthinking everything, and
yeah,
it's like 9,000 tabs open and we can't really calm ourselves. It's like we
yeah.
need things that bring us back to our body.
Yeah, I mean, if you saw my computer, you'd be like, "Oh, her brain is right there," like, because it is
Yeah.
9,000. Because I mean, that's still in a weird way how I work, but that's not how I can't live like that, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So I really think that's true. The inner child is something, and I know people are like, "Oh, but my God, if you just check it, it's there." And there are probably many ages of them, and it makes it a lot easier to live if you're interested in
Yes.
that, you know? Like,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So it was good to hear
Awesome.
that you've had the same experience, because I don't always, it's not an easy subject always to bring up unless, you know, somebody else has had eating disorders, or, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like we learn to trust other people more than we trust ourselves. And
Yeah.
especially as teenagers, we're at such a vulnerable time of we want to, impress our peers and we want to get their approval. And we do that in a lot of different ways. And one way that I tried, similar to you, was that like
Mhm.
I'm going to use food to control how my body looks.
Yeah.
And it can be a very slippery slope.
It can be a super slippery slope, because you don't always, I also think to a certain extent, my vanity, which I also had, like, is sort of a character defect, but it did save me from when I started not wanting to be like look bad. Do you know what I mean? Like suddenly I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, and as much as vanity can really take you down, it can also, when it's vanity is really kind of it's sort of something that can protect, you can protect yourself a little bit with it, but if it's turned up to 5,000 it can become something else entirely. But sort of what took me down, which I don't think it was necessarily vanity, because I don't think I ever thought about the way I looked. I thought about being thin, but then when I started seeing it, like also especially as you get older, like I was like, I don't like things I used to hate, I'm like, and so you start sort of having a different, your vanity's like, I did never smoked because I was afraid of what it was gonna, and I was like, good, great, your vanity saved you from that one, like,
Yes. Yeah.
great, not that I think your vanity should be used as a tool necessarily, but it is an alarm clock in both directions, so, I mean, those are the things I work with, like if I can look at in the mirror and be like, hey, then I'm good. But if I suddenly start seeing other things, then, I go back to like, who's looking through the eyes, who's doing this, and it really
Yeah.
does help. And it starts getting very, very short period of time. And you start having to not work that hard on it. And it's really fun to get informed about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us and opening your heart and opening your experiences, as
Thank
difficult
you for
as they may be
having,
to
thank you for
share.
doing this. I think it's
Yeah.
really important what you do.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't deserve to take up space. This was the belief that Camilla was telling herself and that she was basing her coping mechanisms on, or her coping strategies. This belief that I don't deserve to take up space. So in an effort to, our minds are so amazing that the beliefs that we tell ourselves, our minds and our bodies will do whatever it takes to make that belief true. Our bodies like truth. Our minds like truth. So if I have this belief that I don't deserve to take up space, my mind and my body will figure out a way to make that true. And for Camille, her method was by using food to control how her body looked, her size and her weight and what she looked like. And is she going to develop into a woman's body? She mentioned that in the interview. This belief that I don't deserve to take up space messaging could have come from her mom, as her mom was very conscious of what she looked like. And Camilla said her mom was often on a diet, or at least cared what she looked like. And or it could have come from other experiences, or even just our perceptions form our beliefs, how we see the world and how we interpret what we are seeing. So Camilla was using food as a method of control. And also, there are a lot of messages in society targeted toward women to look a certain way. Again, this belief that I can't take up space or that I need to become invisible. These messages, and we talk about it a little bit in the podcast, that for women, we need to look big in certain areas and small in other areas in order for us to be quote unquote acceptable in society. So our perceptions teach us or condition our beliefs about ourselves, whether they are true or not, whether they're helpful or not. It is what it is. When we're little and we have limited life experiences, these beliefs start to become deeply rooted in who we are and who we are becoming. And as adults, we have the opportunity to look at these beliefs and really assess whether they are true or not. And some of the work that Camilla has been doing in order to change these beliefs so that they are actually true, so that she doesn't have to change who she is or what she looks like in order for those beliefs to be true. She talked about inner child work. Who's driving? Is the 5-year-old the driver of the 40-year-old body? Are we acting as if, are we giving reactions and responses that would be more typical of a 5-year-old because we're kind of stuck in that hurt mentality or in experiences from when we were 5? One of the coping strategies that Camilla talked about that she learned throughout rehab was act as if, even if you don't want to, act as if whatever the new belief you have is true. And your brain will find a way. Again, it's very smart in that the beliefs that we hold, our body and our mind will find a way to make it true. So act as if, even if you don't want to. Visualization exercises was another thing that Camilla used. Our bodies remember our experiences and the things that we go through, but our mind tries to forget in order to protect ourselves. So if we can get back into our body and explore the things that are making us feel hurt, scared, frustrated, those really strong emotions, then we can truly start to heal from the things that are bringing us discomfort and even anxiety, depression in our current selves, in our current bodies. And we can ask ourselves, where does it sit in my body? Where is it tight? Where is it tingly? Where is it different? Where is it uncomfortable? Where does it sit in your body? And Camilla references havening, which are techniques to help bring yourself back to your body. So when your mind is just going and racing and you have so many open tabs in your brain and so many thoughts pulling you in different directions, if you can bring yourself back to your body and actually explore, where is this sitting in my body? These are all really great ways to use creative expressions as tools for healing trauma. And I love Camilla's story of resiliency and finding ways to recognize the beliefs that are no longer working and change them in our bodies. And that is exactly what I do with emotional processing, is we recognize the beliefs that are no longer working and we find new ways. We explore, we do visualization exercises and inner child work, all within the span of about 2 hours. We look at the coping mechanisms that you're currently using. And a lot of times it will show up in our lives as triggers or things that are really frustrating or themes in our life that keep coming back over and over again. And we look at those and we assess whether they're working or not. And if you're ready to change your perspective, then we focus on that. And if anything, listening to Camilla's story, it's helped remind me that we can overcome these things and we can rewire our brains and learn a new way, that we're never too old to learn a new way. Thank you for listening in to this week's episode. And if you are interested in learning more about an emotional processing session for yourself or your children process amazingly well because they haven't had as long to reinforce these beliefs through their actions. So if you are needing a process for yourself or for a family member, check out in the show notes below. There's a link called Emotional Processing Schedule click on the link and check out my schedule. And I can't wait to help you start feeling better and to start reprogramming the way that your mind and your body perceives and responds to stress. You deserve to live a fulfilling life, a life full of meaning and of peace and of purpose and of hope. And we can change your belief systems. We can find a new way of coping that actually is getting you what you want, which most often is love and acceptance and approval and feeling like you are lovable. Thanks for joining me this week, and I look forward to talking to you next week.